Breaking news. Canon makes an official statement about third-party lenses. We have leaked images and specs for the Nikon ZF. We have detailed information about the upcoming Sony A9 Mark III, and information for Fuji's GFX 100 Mark II has been leaked. I'll tell you all about it, but first I want to thank our sponsor, Squarespace. Let's face it, having a web presence in 2023 is kind of difficult. You put most of your energy into social media, but then they can tweak the algorithm and suddenly you have to pay to get access to everything. Or worse yet, they could host your competitors' ads on your own page. Fix all of that by having your own web presence. Start at squarespace.com/Tony. You can set up a website completely free, no credit card required. Then add all the features you want. You just make your pictures and videos look great, or set up a store. Take appointments from clients. Whatever you can imagine starts at squarespace.com/Tony. Free trial, no credit card. When you love it, the coupon code Tony gets you 10% off. Thank you, Squarespace. Our top story. An outlet called Canon Beta did an interview with one of the executives at Canon and asked him about whether they would support third-party lenses, and his answer was not no. Here's what he said, translated with Google Translate. Although it is still limited to some special companies, Canon has opened RF to third-party lens manufacturers through licensing. Now, if we receive a request from a third-party lens company to open the mount, we will study whether to license it according to Canon's own business planning and strategy. In fact, we are now communicating with several third-party lens companies in this regard. Here's what I think. Don't buy a camera without making sure that the company offers the lenses that you need for it. In fact, I recommend people start by shopping for the lenses and then pick the best body that fits those lenses, because the glass is more important than the body. Now let's take a look at those Nikon ZF specifications and pictures. This is coming courtesy of Nikon Rumors. You should follow them directly and get this information a little bit quicker than I can provide it. Nikon Rumors is suggesting the body alone will start at about $2,000. That makes a lot of sense to me. The sensor will be 25 megapixels. I wouldn't be surprised if that gets rounded down to 24 megapixels. And it will have better autofocus than the Z6 Mark II. It will have a similar design to the Nikon ZFC that I have here. I bet it will be available in either silver or solid black, which means a retro design, but it'll have a little bit of a bump on the grip, which makes sense to support the bigger full-frame body. It will also have the little aperture LCD display on the top, and in addition to the dial switching between photo and video, it'll have a dedicated black and white mode, which I guess is turning on sort of a photo filters thing, trying to simulate black and white photography, but the cool thing is you can actually see it in black and white in the viewfinder. It'll also have a flippy screen, a flip forward screen, just like the ZFC does there, making it a good hybrid camera. Now, Nikon Rumors is suggesting that it might have been linked in this Lynx TV video. I was not previously familiar with Lynx TV, but looking through their videos, I see that they have covered what appears to be paid commercials for Nikon before, and people say they've had pre-release cameras in the past. So it's entirely possible that they would have the Nikon ZF camera in their hands. And as somebody who's constantly surrounded by pre-release cameras, it's entirely possible that you would carry it while doing a video about something else and simply forget that you had it and put it on video accidentally. That has happened to many of my peers. So all of this is sounding pretty plausible, but another possibility is that it's actually a Nikon vintage camera. I see Lynx TV does review vintage lenses and they regularly shoot with film. So it is entirely possible they have some Nikon body, like I have one here, and I do sometimes shoot with it because I love the way they feel, and that is kind of what Nikon is trying to capture with the ZF. And it would be really hard to distinguish in this blurry picture whether it was a film body or a new modern digital body that was designed to look like a film body. As we look side by side with a Nikon body, you could see it could be that. Or it could be something slightly different. I just can't tell, like the flange distance or the little things that you would need to know. But either way, this is about what the Nikon ZF is going to look like, though I personally will get mine in chrome. As you can tell, that is my preference. Now let's talk about the new Sony A9 Mark III. As a reminder, the Sony A9 is Sony's sports camera. Now, the A1 is an excellent sports camera, but at 50 megapixels, it's a bit much for professional sports shooters to be processing all the time. So I think it's better suited as wildlife, though it is also an excellent sports camera. The most sports and wedding photographers I know will actually pick up an A9 because honestly, consumers don't really need all those extra megapixels and it just slows the entire process down. So there is definitely room for a new A9. In fact, it's kind of overdue. Sony is going through and refreshing all of their cameras. Sometimes it's a very minor update, but they give it the latest menu system, which provides touch menus and just like really basic things. They've been giving every camera 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. This comes to us from Sony Alpha Rumors, and GN, I see you. And yes, I'm making a video about it. You know why? Because I don't think this is an utter nonsense rumor. I think all of this actually makes sense. And the little things that don't make sense somehow add a little more credibility to it because they're so specific that I don't think somebody would invent it. Now, the weirdest thing about this is they're saying the A9 Mark III will have a built-in vertical grip, not unlike the Canon R3 or the Nikon Z9. The built-in vertical grip was just a standard mainstay for all professional cameras for decades. And it was actually weird when Sony didn't include one, when they just made it optional. But Sony has kind of an obsession with making their cameras and lenses as small as humanly possible, something that I've kind of grown to like. So it is weird to me that they would decide to add a vertical grip, but here's the thing. The vertical grip actually allows better weatherproofing and better dust proofing because when you really seal a camera up, cooling the processors inside becomes more and more difficult. And this camera is very powerful and is going to be generating a lot of heat. And having that extra space in there allows you to build better heat sinks and to better distribute the heat. Apparently we'll have 2 of Sony's FC100 batteries and they will be hot swappable. You'll be able to remove either one without removing the other, which means it must have openings on either side or maybe the bottom of it, but that might make sense if you were doing a long time recording and you didn't want to have to interrupt recording to replace the batteries. It will also have a 3.4-inch tilting touchscreen, and that makes sense. That's bigger than the standard 3-inch screen you get on Sony cameras, and that extra space would make things a little bit bigger and brighter, but it would also necessitate you having a bigger camera body. Supposedly the dual touchscreen will work when your hands are wet or with gloves, and that's the kind of marketing touch that Sony really likes to emphasize in their material. So again, that makes sense to me. And another logical thing, it'll have 2 CF Express Type A cards or work with SD cards, but you can also use USB out to record video and stills to an SSD. And Panasonic did this, the Panasonic S5 II did this, and I actually thought it was pretty useful, especially if you're recording lots and lots of files, or you just want something a little bit cheaper and you don't mind it because you already have a rig set up. So all of that makes a lot of sense to me. Now they're saying the sensor will be 29 megapixels and they're calling it global shutter and that it won't have a mechanical shutter. Now, when we say global shutter, it's often used not quite literally. Global shutter would mean a sensor readout speed of 0 milliseconds. And the sensors we have now in cameras like the A1 and the Z9 are very fast. I think they're about 1/250th. If you were to take the readout speed of those cameras and scale it down for the resolution of 29 megapixels, that would put you at about like a 1/400th, 1/450th readout speed. And that would be perfectly fine. That is faster than what most mechanical shutters get. That's about the speed of the mechanical shutter on the A1. So at that point, it would be a little bit redundant to put in a mechanical shutter. Sony Alpha Rumors is saying it will record full resolution stills at 120 frames per second in a compressed format like HIF, which is like JPEG, but a little bit more sophisticated. But at that high frame rate, the buffer will run out in about 2 seconds, like it's filling up the sensor's buffer. And this is the kind of arbitrary restriction that makes me think this must be real, because this is all making a lot of sense. And 120 frames per second is not out of hand. Like the Canon R3 will do over that, like 190 something. So this is entirely feasible. And supposedly if you're recording in a reduced resolution, kind of like the Z9 does, it will record 240 frames per second. If you don't want to be restricted by that very short buffer, you can write to the normal buffer at a frame rate of 60 frames per second in compressed RAW or HIF files, and probably write for an unlimited amount of time. Or you can do 30 frames per second with uncompressed RAW. And what we're seeing is a trade-off between frame rates and bit rates, right? Lower bit rates mean higher frame rates and vice versa. And this is not the kind of thing people would normally make up. Let's talk about the design of it. Supposedly the viewfinder is only 5.7 million dots, which is lower resolution than that of the Sony A1, but it will have a higher refresh rate. And the fact is the Sony A1 doesn't use that full resolution when you're actually autofocusing. It's just when you're playing things back. So it makes it nice, but at the same time, it might not be worth it, especially since it must slow down the refresh rate a little bit. So 240 hertz refresh rate means it refreshes 240 times a second, which would give you extremely smooth, like that's the limit of human perception, essentially. The rumor is saying it will support voice-to-text metadata. So these cameras, like the Canon 1 series, will allow you to press a microphone button on the back and record an audio clip that is associated with a still photo. So you could take notes to yourself about what was happening. You know, if you're shooting the presidential inauguration and you just need to be like, okay, he was reading from page 5 here, something like that. Now, when they say voice to text, I'm sure all they're saying is that once you get it on a computer, you'll be able to use Sony Imaging Edge to process the file, extract that audio, run it through a voice to text system, and then put that back in your image. I guarantee there's going to be an extra step. There's a slim possibility they figured out how to cram voice to text into their cameras, but that would require software beyond the current software operating system, so that doesn't feel right to me. I think it's probably on the computer. It's also rumored to have a built-in GPS. It definitely should. That is so feasible. Every camera should have that. Now, here's something that seems a little unrealistic to me. They're saying it's going to have 5G cellular. This would be fantastic. It is not a big deal to integrate cellular connections. It's not that much harder than doing a Wi-Fi connection, for example. And it would be tremendously useful for sending files off to your editor when you did not have access to a Wi-Fi access point. So there's definitely demand for that. I personally would love it, but will we actually see it? I really question that. It could be that saying 5G cellular is actually saying that they have a connection to a phone and that things move through your phone in real time. I don't know. And it will have a 5 gig Ethernet wired connection to it, which is better than the sort of standard 1 gig connection. We have 10 gig Ethernet here at home for moving the big video files around, and I know 5 gig gives you appreciably faster transfers, which is going to be important if you're shooting at 240 frames per second, right? For the video specs, they're saying it's not going to have 8K, which makes sense with the 29 megapixel spec, and it won't record external RAWs, but it will do 1080 at 960 frames per second, but cropped down, probably to a 1:1 readout. So that's going to put you at like a 1.7 or 1.8 crop. It'll do full HD at 480 frames per second, which is 16 times slow motion, which is like too much. But if you were publishing at 60p, that could just be 8 times slow motion. Still, people are going to be moving very, very slow, even the super fast athletes, but it's always nice to have more, right? And that'll be oversampled full width. In 4K, if you crop down, which won't be such a huge crop, maybe like a 1.3 or 1.4 times crop, it will record at 240 frames per second, or you can do full width, I think, at 120 frames per second. I'm guessing the price is going to be competitive with the Canon R3 at about $6,000, but I also wouldn't be surprised to see it go up to $6,500 and match the A1. One more camera, and that is the Fuji GFX 100, the next edition. I'm calling it the Mark II, and this comes via FujiRumors.com. Fuji Rumors is saying that it's not going to have an integrated grip, so the form factor will be more like the GFX 100S. But I'm thinking it might have the interchangeable viewfinder, a feature that I really liked, if nothing else for the ability to take it off and have it be a little bit more compact. They're saying it's going to have a 100 megapixel sensor, but that it will be updated. And I'd be shocked if it wasn't improving the readout speed, which would do a lot of things like reduce the rolling shutter with the electronic shutter, but also improve the autofocus capabilities by just allowing it to refresh the sensor a little more often. And then it will have a new processor. And the new processor also makes a lot of sense if what you wanted to do was to improve the autofocus, which is kind of like a dire need with the GFX series. That was my biggest problem. Like even for portraits and stuff, it's kind of painful. If you switch from another modern camera like an A1 to one of the GFX cameras, you'll find you're missing focus a lot, even on kind of still subjects. They're also rumored to release 3 new lenses, a 55mm f1.7, a 30mm f5.6 tilt shift, and 110mm f5.6 tilt shift. And the tilt shift, that surprises me quite a bit because I don't see a lot of demand for tilt shift lenses. But if anybody was going to do it, it would be Fuji, and they would do it for the GFX medium format. Medium format does have this history of tilt shift lenses. In the comments down below, tell me which of these 3 new cameras you are most excited for. And if you haven't yet, Go set up your own website, show off your work. I find it so satisfying to have an online portfolio and update it. Every time I get a picture that I'm proud of, it actually drives me to go take more pictures. And is it showing off? Yeah, a little bit, but that's okay because that's what photography is about. It's about capturing and sharing what you see, your own individual work. And honestly, social media is not great for that anymore. With social media, people see your latest work, which isn't your greatest work. But when somebody meets you for the first time, you want to show them something curated, something that is formatted for their phone, that fills the screen, that shows off the very best of who you are, your lifelong body of work. And the best way to do that is to go to squarespace.com/Tony, and that is completely free to try out. Sign up, put your pictures up. When you're ready to sign up, the coupon code Tony gets you 10% off. So remember that. Thank you, Squarespace. Bye.